Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Rosie Murphy.
And I'm Sammy Roth, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
We are still in Season 3, and we have reached Episode 20, The Man Behind the Curtain.
This is, of course, the first Ben episode on Lost. We learn that he has been lying this whole time when he said he was born on the island, and we find out about his relationship with his father.
He's been lying about some other stuff, too, because we also find out might be an overstatement, but we are led to believe a number of things about Jacob and then led to believe that those things might not be true.
And helping guide us through this morass, we have an interview with a man named Bobby Roth, who directed this episode of Lost and a couple of others down the line, and he has a truly unique perspective on the show.
I'm so excited. Let's get right into it.
We always start on the Hatch with our hottest takes about the week's episode. This is an episode that's going to, yield a lot of hot takes, I think. Rosie,
yeah.
what do you got?
Oh my goodness. I complained about this last week. I think it was my hot take last week, but honestly, I've still got to go with Jack's leadership style has totally gone bananas, I think. Like, he shows up here with Juliet and is sort of rightfully confronted with this tape and the fact that Juliet appears to be actively betraying the group. And then, of course, she says, oh, flip the tape over. I'm actually a double agent or maybe a triple agent at this point. I'm not sure.
I think she's a quadruple or a quintuple agent, actually.
And then, there's sort of a big argument about why didn't Jack tell anybody? And he says, oh, well, I haven't decided what to do about it yet. And I was just like, last week it seemed like Jack was really like abdicating his leadership role and not caring about what people in the group felt about him. And I guess this is a continuation of that because he hasn't decided to bring anyone else into this fold, despite all of the expertise around him. I mean, you're planning this sort of military style endeavor and you're not going to tell Saeed. They're like other. I don't think this was a great strategy, and it just irked me.
So, I am going to just go right into my hot take off of that. Because this is the only take I can have that's hotter than yours on that topic.
Oh dear.
I'm actually going to defend Jack.
Okay.
Believe it or not, I wrote a note to myself when watching this episode that was pretty much exactly what you just said. Mm-hmm. Which is, when Jack says, I hadn't decided what to do about it yet, right. I've written here, WTF Jack with a bunch of question marks. Classic bad leadership. Rather than share what you know and ask for input, keep it to yourself because you only trust yourself to come up with a plan and foster mistrust and discord in the process.
Incredible.
So
Incredible take, but what changed your mind?
So I was just sitting here as we were getting ready to go thinking about it, and I started to think, and I thought, what would have happened if Jack had told everyone what was going on?
Uh-huh.
There would have been a fucking panic. If he had just told them as soon as he knew, hey, the others are planning to show up in 2 nights to, steal our pregnant women, right. I feel like that's a situation he might have lost control of really, really quickly. Would people have fled the beach? Would they have decided to, charge the others' village?
Yeah.
Would they have, lynched Juliet, essentially? Like,
right.
I don't know. I mean, what Jack ended up doing was coming up with what turns out to be a quite good plan. He's, coordinated with Rousseau. They're getting the dynamite out of the jungle. They're going to blow the others to smithereens when they show up. Mm-hmm. Like, it doesn't end up working perfectly, but all things considered, it's a good plan. It
mostly works.
Yeah, it depends on nobody, doing anything crazy. It depends on keeping Juliet within the fold and keeping her safe and not blowing her cover in either direction. I think that you're right to recognize that Saeed would have been very helpful in planning this out.
Yeah.
But I feel like, it's a messy process, but Jack gets the results here.
No, you're not wrong. The mass panic is definitely a good point. I don't know that I think he should have called a council and sort of said to all 40 people who were left on the beach, like, hey, everyone, surprise attack coming. But I do think he would have benefited from having like a small council of advisors or something instead of just him and Juliet kind of hold up over here making this plan. But you're right.
You led me to believe before we got started that you might have a second and possibly multiple additional hot takes. Is that true?
I mean, as you said, this episode is going to be just peppered with hot takes because so much incredible stuff happens. But I was just blown away by how committed John Locke is to being skeptical of Ben's claims about Jacob until the very, very end. And even at the very end, in the tent, he so comfortably says, "You're the man behind the curtain and you're a liar." And when he's pressing Ben to take, he's calling his bluff basically and saying, "Yeah, take me to Jacob." And Ben says, "Oh, well, Jacob summons us. We don't go to him." And John just sort of deadpan looks at him eating this orange and says, "Well, I guess there's a first time for everything." And
the orange is a really nice touch.
That's a really, really great Terry O'Quinn moment. And even when the cabin starts shaking, John thinks Ben is playing a trick.
And even afterwards, he says to him later on,
"There is no Jacob, Ben. I'm not going to be taken in by the little show you put on last night. You're a fraud. And it's time your people were told the truth."
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, we'll get into what exactly may or may not have happened there, but gosh, this is sort of, I mean, we've seen that John is a man of his convictions and he sticks to them, but I don't know that we've ever seen him convinced that somebody's so full of bullshit. Like, he believes to his core that Ben is full of shit on this Jacob point, and yet, I don't know. I mean, last week he was like, "Okay, you tell me I've got to kill my father, I'll kill my father." I don't know. John just really seems to have some switch has flipped.
Well, I mean, I have many thoughts on this, but it's an interesting role for Locke to be playing as the skeptic about the island's magic and mystery.
Right.
Locke is our man of faith. He believed from day one without really anything to go on outside of course, his own miraculous healing, which perhaps there's plenty to go on.
Right.
He finds this hatch in the jungle and thinks, "God damn it, there must be something important in here. I was meant to find this. I'm going to, work Boone to death."
The island demanded.
Yeah, exactly. And here we are where Ben finally seems like he's going to at least start to spill the beans on this mysterious Jacob, the man behind the curtain, and Locke isn't having it.
No.
And to Locke's credit, he's completely right.
Right.
And we talked about this last week, but Ben is completely shitting him the whole time.
Oh yeah, he's right in the sense that Jacob does exist. He's not making this up whole cloth, but he's never talked to Jacob. He's never seen him. He doesn't know where to find him.
He seems to have some sense that perhaps there's a link between Jacob and this cabin.
Right.
But it also seems very much like his whole plan was to go in there and pretend to be talking to a dude in a chair in order to make Locke feel like he's not special because he can't see Jacob. At least that's my read on it.
Well, and maybe this is hindsight. I can't go back and watch this for the first time again, but it seemed like he was faking it, didn't it? I mean...
So, yeah, when he's having the conversation?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Ben's as freaked out as Locke is when shit starts to happen in there. He didn't think there was anyone in that chair.
Yeah.
I agree completely.
Oh.
I mean, in terms of why Locke is so skeptical, I think it goes back to the beginning of this episode, and I'm pulling up the transcript on Lostpedia so that I can get it right.
"Where are you going?" "Hell, Ben, if you don't want to take me, maybe someone else will. I'll just go and ask Richard." "Why would Richard take you?"
He doesn't know where Jacob is. He doesn't talk to Jacob.
"Well, who talks to him?"
I do.
"Well, you're the only one who talks to him."
That's right.
"And no one else knows where he is?"
I was born here on this island. I'm one of the last that was. Most of these people you see, I brought them here. So Jacob talks to me, John. He tells me what to do, trusts me.
And no one else has ever seen him.
That's right.
How convenient.
I think that Locke recognizes really fast that Ben did not expect him to come back here with his father's body and have to answer questions is kind of... And Ben looks terrified when Locke walks back into that camp with Anthony Cooper slung over his back.
And immediately Locke gets the upper hand.
Right, and really plays that upper hand very well, because I just think that he recognizes in this conversation that Ben is like ad-libbing this and doesn't have answers, and when he gets to the part of, well, Jacob has the answers, I think that Ben just recognizes that, or Locke recognizes that Ben is totally making this up as it goes along, and just is trying to figure out some way to stall him and put it off. So I think that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
And Locke calls him on, your hand was shaking when you said all of this stuff, which is a great detail.
And later Ben goes back and tries to cover for that with, I'm just so terrified of Jacob. It's like, come on, man. No, yeah.
Extremely unconvincing.
It feels really hollow, but it's impressive to see John. Like, so much of what we see with John is this kind of self-doubt, and, he has faith, but he doesn't really know in what, and he just seems like we've talked about this. There are episodes even in this season where he comes off as kind of like simple, for lack of a better word, and like he's really having trouble navigating like the politics of these relationships, and all of that is over in this episode. Like, he not only does he have the vision, but he has the savvy to execute it.
Right, and meanwhile Ben, who is the master manipulator, or so we think, is just totally, what's the expression? I don't know what the expression is. He's just utterly, defeated by Locke calling his bluff.
Oh yeah,
again and again.
Yeah, he has no plan for that.
Do you think it's the fact that Locke has now done away with the specter of his father, that now he has this even though he manipulates Sawyer into doing it, do you think that has something to do with his newfound confidence and sort of no taking of bullshit?
I don't know, because I didn't really get a sense when Locke was on the island that he necessarily had the specter of his father hanging over him. I mean, when we talked last week about why John couldn't kill Cooper, and we talked about how part of that was that he still wanted deep down to be accepted. This was his father, and it was a man he, looked up to in some twisted way, and he needed his approval. Maybe he no longer, how can you need the approval of someone who's dead? Like, it is kind of, there's finality to that, at least. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I guess I just think that so much of the Locke that you were just describing, that we've seen, throughout the years at times, this sort of weak and broken and underconfident, lacking direction type person. I mean, so much of that, at least in his adult life, I think we can attribute to the impact that his father had on him. Building up his trust in this relationship, and then breaking it, and then literally breaking Locke physically, and leading to the breakup of his engagement with, or potential engagement with Helen. It just, maybe now that the man who did that to him is gone, perhaps Locke is feeling newly empowered. I don't know. I don't know that we have a lot of evidence for that, except that last week Locke was one person, and this week he seems to be a different person.
Well, and I do think things with Ben were already kind of going this way. Like, we had that great turnabout with you're in a wheelchair and I'm not a couple of weeks ago. Was that The Man from Tallahassee? Or I can't remember.
Yeah, that was The Man from Tallahassee.
And I think this kind of back and forth has been going on for a while now, and John is learning. A big part of what he's learning here is how afraid Ben is of him and of the threat that he poses.
I think that the idea that Ben has been, sensed this threat to his leadership for a while, and that this dynamic has been building where Locke has the upper hand on him because of Locke's connection with the island. I think that what it makes me think is it makes my mind go all the way back to Ben getting captured, intentionally in season 2. What it makes me think now, looking back at that, is thinking, gee, probably a main reason that Ben went and got himself captured is because he needed to get up close and personal with Locke and see what was going on with this guy.
Yeah.
Because Locke was the thing that mattered to him personally the most, the threat to his leadership.
Right.
And that was probably one of the main things he was doing there.
Even then.
And we also, I mean, and we talked about this last week, but we see in this episode again that Ben's grasp on leadership is more tenuous than we might have been.
Extremely tenuous.
The moment when Locke starts beating the crap out of Mikhail and Ben yells at everyone to stop him, and meanwhile Richard's just standing there looking. Yeah, nobody does. And Tom takes a sip of coffee, like, you looking at me?
I didn't notice that.
Yeah, no, Tom is sitting there, like, drinking his mug of coffee while Ben is yelling at his people to stop this from happening, and they do nothing. And it just, after what we saw with Richard last week, giving Locke that info, it just makes me think, Ben is their leader, but probably a lot of them don't especially like being led by him.
No,
and I would be open to change.
When Ben, begins to explain that, well, our real leader is Jacob, but only I can talk to him, and, of course, all this stuff that ends up being untrue, but everyone's just cool with that. Like, I remember thinking, no wonder his grasp on leadership is so tenuous. Like, what he's been telling people is, well, my source of knowledge is this Jacob who you can't see and who you have, he, for all you know, I'm making him up, which he kind of is. But, like, he's never really given these people any reason to believe that he's working with any real knowledge here. And I think what we learn in this story arc is that he's not working with any real knowledge, and maybe, the reason they've trusted him is because he assumed leadership and, things have gone okay, and sort of through kind of a combination of apathy and contentment and maybe sort of fear of crossing him, he's maintained it. But yeah, that's very different from people trusting him. Yeah,
and not only does he, is he making this stuff up about Jacob and he can't prove it to them? I mean, maybe Richard is out there, like, undermining him. We don't know. Like, Richard, the guy who actually can speak to Jacob, or at least has. I don't know if he's done it recently. Like, maybe Jacob or maybe Richard is whispering to people, like, yeah, he said that Jacob wants that, but I don't really buy that. I don't think he talked to Jacob.
Right.
You never know.
Right. Well, and Richard also being, someone who knows that one of his key claims, that he was born on the island, is not true.
Right.
Not that Richard's, like, blackmailing Ben, but he knows a little bit about...
He does.
He knows more than anybody else about Ben's origin story, and he surely can see that some of it is nonsense.
Well, that makes me wonder even more. Has Richard told anyone that?
Yeah.
I mean, so far, all the signs we've got about Richard indicate that he's willing to, at least in subtle ways, pursue his own agenda, or pursue what he perceives to be, the island's agenda.
The long-term interests of the island, yeah.
Yeah, and, I mean, yeah, Richard and Ben go back. Like, Richard brought him into the others, helped him orchestrate the purge, like, probably at least acquiesced to his leadership when he took out Charles Widmore. Probably Richard hated Widmore, just gonna guess on that one. So maybe it was a lesser of two evils situation, but... Like, we see with Mikhail, he says he's a loyalist, he's willing to do anything for Ben. That's not Richard, and I don't know that we have a lot of evidence that it's Tom or any of the other, some semi-leadership figures within the group either.
I'm sorry, cut this if you want, but it came to mind and I'm just going to say it.
Say it.
Inasmuch as there is a deep state in the others... I think that's the function Richard is performing.
There's no way I'm going to cut that. Richard is the deep state. It's canon. Putting it on Lostpedia.
Oh, geez. Well, should we, speaking of Richard, leading Ben to commit the purge, this is a pretty heavy flashback.
Yeah.
This is, a lot of really upsetting stuff happens in this flashback. One is that, Ben is born under tragic circumstances.
I thought you were going to say the upsetting thing was that Ben was born.
Oh, my God.
Very upsetting. Ben was born.
That's how his dad feels, which is upsetting.
That is
Roger,
extremely upsetting.
Turns out to just really be a dreadful father.
Makes Christian Shepherd look like a saint.
Oh, my God, yeah. Emotionally abusive, like, unclear why he came to I mean, it sounds like Horace, was kind of like, oh, I'm doing this science thing on this island. Do you want to come? And he comes, and then, we see the scene briefly where he's like pushing for what seems like a ridiculous amount of additional pay because there's, incursions by the hostiles or whatever. Like he's clearly sort of a problem drinker.
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, the moment where he tells Ben on his birthday, it's hard to celebrate the day you killed your mother. It's just about the worst possible thing a parent could say to their child. I mean, I don't know how it gets worse than that.
I mean, no wonder Ben runs. And
no wonder Ben is so fucked up.
Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, we don't see any of this, but it doesn't seem that difficult to understand how Ben could have kind of been groomed to help the purge happen. And I think there's a big difference between the purge and sort of Ben killing his father. Like, the killing of Roger is super personal. It's a straight up murder. Like, all of it's murder. But it's not significantly different than just shooting him, I don't think. Or than what Sawyer does to Anthony Cooper.
No.
Sitting in the van, whipping out the gas mask and opening up the...
I frankly have a lot fewer problems with Ben killing his father than with the murder of the entire Dharma Initiative. I mean, all killing is bad, but like...
Right.
There was a very legitimate grievance here, and it's hard to feel sympathy for the guy.
Yeah. Yeah, and in like you said, a lot of fucked up father-son relationships in Lost, and some of them end in murder, and it's not the most surprising thing in the world. But yeah, the purge of everybody else is difficult. Is very difficult.
It is. I asked Bobby Roth about this, and I asked Nestor about this, and nobody really has had, no criticism to them, but nobody's had a great answer for here's why, here's why these characters really felt that it was okay, or here's what, the mitigating circumstance was, or how we dealt with it as a show that, made it not just straight up genocide that horrific, you should feel terrible about.
And what I remember Nestor saying is, I didn't understand it at the time, but knowing what I knew and believed about Richard, I just assumed he believed that he was doing it for a greater purpose or whatever, but yikes.
Well, I mean, Ben, the closest thing we get to an explanation this episode, and maybe ever, is a line from Ben at the end where he is sort of criticizing Dharma to Locke when they're standing over the open pit.
This is where I came from, John. These are my people. The Dharma Initiative. They came here seeking harmony. But they couldn't even coexist with the island's original inhabitants. And when it became clear that one side had to go, one side had to be purged, I did what I had to do.
So it seems like he's, sort of putting the blame on Dharma and sort of making them sound a little bit like,
colonizers.
Like they came and they, tried to get in the way of the the native indigenous population, and I don't know, it certainly doesn't hold a lot of water.
No, I don't think so.
It's something that I have a lot of difficulty with. Like, even this isn't really a criticism of the show, although it will kind of sound like it. I guess it is a little bit of a criticism of the show.
Well,
I feel like it's if you're going to do something of this level of heinousness with the historical context that exists surrounding murder of entire civilizations and whatnot, like you've got to really put you can't justify a thing like that, but I think you've got to explain really what's going on and why these characters who you're supposed to continue sympathizing with, like Ben and Richard, would have participated in an act like this.
Right.
And I don't think the show really does that work. I think we're kind of just like, we kind of have to just as we, watch Ben and Richard and the others, going forward, we just kind of have to accept that this happened and not think about it too hard. Otherwise, it's just impossible to deal with these people.
All we really get is well, they had their reasons, you know, and this pretty weak explanation from Ben here. And, you know, as this history gets as the pre-Dharma history gets fleshed out a little bit more, when we go back to Charles Woodmore's time on the island, I mean, it becomes clear that it's not like the people who were already on the island were this long-established society, and Dharma came in and sort of took what wasn't theirs. I mean, it seems like the island has seen sort of waves of settlement, of exploitation, of people coming to try to understand it and to harness the power. And, you know, presumably there were people before Whitmore. Well,
you mean they come, they fight, they destroy, they corrupt, it always ends the same?
I do. I do, in fact, mean exactly that.
Sounding a lot like the Man in Black there, Rosie. No, but you're right. You're totally right. It's not like this was a pristine and wonderful, you know, like long-standing civilization that Dharma has come there and disrupted. Like, it's a ragtag band of people who, you know, have come somewhat recently in different ways and are kind of
a patchwork of people from different waves of settlement and
who have plenty of their own problems and sins.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, all of those civilizations ended somehow too, in ways that probably aren't. It's easier for me to think of this as, you know, these were two or multiple societies that were kind of in a state of war, although they weren't, you know, they weren't actively fighting, but they did build these sonar fences, you know, not for no reason. Like, they felt some sort of a threat. I mean, to me, that's a reaction to we are in a state of war. And I think it's easier for me to liken this to dropping an atomic bomb or something than it, you know, some really horrific act that sort of still occurs within the context of war, rather than like an out and out eradication of a people group. Well, yeah, and then that makes Ben more of a traitor or a spy than, you know, some like deeply, deeply evil person, right? He defected.
Right. I wasn't sure if I was going to say this or not. I guess the thing that maybe, you know, like bothers me that they could have just done away with, I wish they had done it in a way that didn't involve, you know, like poison gas.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, you know, again, like the historical context, and it's like they could have come up with another way to kill all the Dharma initiative that, you know, didn't make you think of gas chambers.
Right.
Just going to put that out there.
No, you're right.
Other than that.
Yeah, well, and it's pretty fucked up that then they just move into their houses.
Yes, it's very fucked up.
Oh, well, and just, I mean, to think about the arc of season 3, the opening of the season was this book club in these cabins, right? And now we have this horrific history of what has happened in this place. And, you know, in a couple of seasons, we're going to get that history fleshed out and possibly modified, depending on how you feel about time travel. But yeah, I was just thinking, you know, during that sort of shot with all the bodies laying around, I was thinking about Juliet burning her cookies. And like, you know, 30, 40, a generation on from this, that's what's happening here. And like, do the others know about this? You know, does anybody other than Ben and Richard know that this is sort of how they got this land, how they got this sonar fence? Like, and what do you do with that?
Yeah, I think this just speaks to those larger questions about who are the others really and where did they come from? Like,
right. Because we only really know why is Tom Friendly here? You know, why...
Right, why is Mikhail really here if he wasn't the last surviving member of the Dharma Initiative? Like, no, it's...
yeah.
It's such a good question, and why we need a show just about the others. We should email Damon's people and just tell them that.
We should.
Should we do hindsights?
Yeah, I kind of have a question for my hindsight. So when, near the very end of this episode, right before Ben shoots John, which is a huge holy shit moment, by the way, and like really, really speaks to just how terrified Ben is. Like, this is his last ditch effort, basically. It's like, well, fuck, I guess I just have to kill this guy. Which is also
although
horrifying.
he does a bad job of it. Another story.
Well, right, unsuccessfully kill this guy. But you know, when he leads John to the pit and explains, you know, this is what happened to the Dharma Initiative, and he says, I was one of the people smart enough to make sure that I didn't end up in that ditch. And that was just like a little knife twist, because we had just seen the genocide, the mass killing scene, and you didn't end up there because you were smart. No, you didn't end up there because you brought this to bear. You know, and that has nothing to do with how smart you are. You didn't end up there because you had a horrible father and you tried to flee and you happened to meet, you know, long-haired Richard out in the jungle. And, you know, that, like, it just gave me the chills when I thought about how that is the twisted way in which Ben sees himself. Like, I am superior to these people, and that's why they deserve to die, or that's why it's okay that they died, but I survived.
I think there's a way to read that makes sense. The way I understood that line was not quite the same way of like, this is just retroactive justification of a horrible, you know, deed and promotion of yourself. I kind of took it more literally as him thinking like, well, one way or another, the hostiles were eventually going to take out Dharma, and I was smart enough to be on the right side of that.
Yeah.
And to you know, cement a place for myself by helping them do it.
Yeah, which is just sort of like, I'm savvy, I'm playing the politics. I was smart enough to get out in front of this, but he didn't just get out in front of it. Like, he actively helped it happen.
He did. Let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
I have always assumed, and I thought there was something in the show to this effect, but that Ben was instrumental in orchestrating the takedown of Dharma.
Right.
That
we don't actually see that in this episode.
Clearly he was part of it.
Right.
But I guess somehow I was always under the impression that Ben had, like, you know, was like the key player, that it was the cultivation of Ben as a traitor that allowed the others to pull that off.
This might be me making a leap, but I always kind of assumed he, like, turned off the sonar fence that day.
Which, it would make sense.
But yeah, I don't know that we've actually seen evidence for that.
Listeners, if we are forgetting something from the show that explains that really this was, you know, this really was Ben and it just comes later, let us know on social media. We're on
please.
Twitter at The Hatch Podcast, Facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast. You can also call us and leave us a hot take on this or any other topic.
You can do that at 9546-DHARMA. Leave us a voicemail. You can also record a voice memo on your phone and message it to the aforementioned Facebook page.
So I have a hindsight, which is just that I have always really wanted to know what happened with Annie later on and between Ben and Annie. I think it's a shame that we never get a flashback that addresses that. I think that, you know, we're led to believe here that Annie was a really significant figure in Ben's life and that there was more, you know, between them post-childhood. What that looked like, we just are left to wonder, and I wish we knew.
Well, yeah, I mean, he kept the doll that she made him. I think you could argue that, you know, that proves that she's a significant figure in his life, or maybe it's the only birthday gift he's ever received. And he keeps it, you know, I think it's possible that she is almost immaterial at that point, and what matters is this is the only person who ever cared enough to remember my birthday, since that seemed to be, you know, they returned to that several times in this episode in terms of Ben's dad forgetting his birthday. And
so I think there are two reasons I disagree with that, and one is a bad reason and one is a good reason. The bad reason is that I'm reminded of this by looking at Lostpedia, that at the time when this episode aired, or maybe it looks like it was on the DVDs, Damon and Carlton said that Annie was really important in Ben's life and that she was going to play a huge role in upcoming storylines, which of course never happens.
Right.
which is disappointing, and I'm sure I knew that at the time. But that's the bad reason. The good reason is that there's this line, I think I referenced this a couple weeks ago, but in The Other Woman in season 4, where someone explains to Juliet, I think was it Harper maybe, Goodwin's wife, someone says to Juliet, don't you know you look exactly like her, in reference to someone in Ben's life. And the her is never explained, but I always assumed that to be Annie.
I had totally forgotten about that.
And the only other option could be like maybe Ben's mother, but like no one in the others living at that point would have, known what Ben's mother, who died when he was a baby, looks like. So I think that we have reason to believe that Annie was significant, and they just never deal with that.
Yeah. So I think we should go ahead and play your conversation with Bobby Roth.
Sounds good.
No relation to yourself.
Not as far as we know.
Well, I guess I didn't ask. I just assumed. But you guys get into great detail about the scene in the cabin. And I think we should play this before we talk about that, because there is so much to parse.
Fair warning, the audio is a little bit quiet on this interview. So we've turned it up real loud, but you should be able to hear everything. But just be warned that it's not the audio quality we strive for on The Hatch necessarily.
That said, Bobby Roth also directed several episodes in later seasons, seasons 5 and 6, so hopefully he will join us again in the future.
I'm here with Bobby Roth, who directed The Man Behind the Curtain and a couple other episodes of Lost. Bobby, thanks very much for being with us on The Hatch.
My pleasure.
So just start at the beginning. How did you end up getting asked to direct this episode?
I'm old friends with Jack Bender, maybe the oldest friends that we could possibly be. Our mothers went to junior high together.
Wow.
And but I think I actually got the job because of Carlton, who knew me. And at the time, I was doing many episodes of Prison Break, which I think Carlton liked.
Well, you lucked into one of the all-time classic Lost episodes, I think.
I feel that way.
Were you familiar? I mean, how familiar were you with the show before this? Were you watching it?
Well, the interesting thing was I had never watched the show when I got hired, but I always try to be prepared. So I watched every episode, and I think there were 54 of them that came before.
Wow.
In a 3-day period with my son, who we just were kind of jamming them into the DVD player at the time. And so it was daunting because the show was impressive. From a director's point of view, the acting, the shot making, and the huge panorama and the storytelling intimidated me. There were 14 major characters, and I was scared, which is usually a good thing for directors because it made me prepare as much as possible.
What was your feeling when you first read this script? I mean, how did you react to The Man Behind the Curtain when you first saw it?
Well, one of the things that's interesting about that show is that you didn't actually read the script. Usually the script was not done when you began prep.
Okay.
I had a very extensive outline, but they were writing through my prep period, so I didn't really get the final script that I shot until maybe one day before I started shooting. But I knew it was Ben's episode, and I knew Ben was important. And then, just a complete fluke, but the night that I arrived in Hawaii, I went to a local restaurant called Town, and Michael Emerson was sitting at the bar by himself. And my son pointed it out to me, and I was a little shy, but I ultimately walked over and introduced myself and said, "You don't know this, but I'm going to be directing the story of your backstory." And he came and sat with us, and it began a friendship that's continued throughout the years. I did a documentary on directing, and he's a very prominent character in it. I really admire him.
So, we just had Nestor Carbonell on the show, who you direct in this episode as well, and his comment, one of his comments that I thought was interesting was that, as an actor on Lost, where there was so much mystery and uncertainty about the characters, that he would, sometimes ask directors, am I doing this right? Is my character doing something for this reason or that reason? Even though he knew that the directors didn't always have those answers. Did you, I'm curious about the process of prepping to do this. Did you have any understanding or knowledge given to you beyond what was on the page in the end, or were you just working off of, what was in the script?
Well, that's a lot of the reason you watch all the other episodes is to see how they shoot it, and there aren't a lot of medium shots in Lost. They're either extremely tight close-ups or very wide vistas. And so over the course of prep, I became good friends with. My first one was shot by Court Fi, the DP. So that the other people on the show, that David, as a director, you're new. You were the new guy, unless you've done repeated episodes. So you have to ask all the key veterans of the show, how is this done? And you don't really get access to the actors. It was a complete fluke that I got to meet Michael at a restaurant, because they're usually shooting an episode while you're prepping. So unless you've worked with them before, which I had with Nestor, you really are starting from scratch and have to learn who these people are and what works for them. So you depend on the crew, is what I'm trying to say. That they tell you, and of course Jack. Funnily enough, Jack wasn't there through most of my shoot because he had to be working on something in Los Angeles at the time. But that's really the job of a producer-director, to kind of help you see the style of the show and what they're looking for.
Okay. I guess, one of the things I was thinking about when I asked that question was, this episode contains, a whole lot of stuff that's relevant to the, the mythology of Lost, and, the background, and revealing things about the characters. You've got, the Dharma Initiative stuff and Ben's flashback, and you've got the very bizarre scene in Jacob's cabin, which I know we're going to want to talk about. I guess I just wondered when, watching that and thinking about your directing it, do you have any better sense than anyone else of what's actually happening here?
Oh, sure. You have a tone meeting with the executive producers. I never spoke to a writer on the show except Damon and Carlton.
Okay.
On any of the episodes I did. But they tell you what they're looking for, and if you've watched all the other episodes, it resonates. And then a lot of it gets made up while you're doing it. So Jacob in particular, when we do speak of the cabin, was a big question mark. Was he really there, or wasn't he there? And of course, when you go to shoot, there isn't, you can't be vague. You have to be very specific. So, of course, I asked, is he there or isn't he there? And I got the answer, what do you think?
Who asked you that? Did Damon ask you that, or Jack, or someone?
I was actually asked to shoot it both ways, but no one provided an actor. So, at the last minute, I asked the strangest looking character on the set, who happened to be the prop guy, Rob Geiger, to put on makeup. He had a very thin face and long hair, and he's only on screen for 8 frames, and 8 frames is a third of a second. So I was pretty relaxed with that, except that what you forget is the fans are going to freeze it and examine every single frame.
Oh yeah, I remember when that happened and that frame was identified.
Yeah, and I don't know, I can't remember whether people knew exactly who he was, but at that moment we didn't know if you'd ever see him again. And then later they cast an actor, I think it was Mark Pellegrino.
Mark Pellegrino, that's right.
Yeah, who I had actually worked with before, but I didn't work with him on that show. And he became Jacob, and he became a fully realized character, but we didn't know that was going to happen when we were shooting the cabin.
You said you shot it both ways? You shot 2 different versions?
I shot the whole scene with no one there.
Yeah.
And then we threw in both a close-up on Rob and a wide shot on Rob, actually playing the scene as if he were there.
Oh, interesting.
Now they only used, as we said, 8 frames of it. But I teach at Art Center College. I teach directing, and when I'm teaching, I often use that scene to talk about preparation, and I talk about what the actors had to do, because the interior of the cabin is a set. The exterior was out in the jungle.
Right.
The tricky part was we had to shoot the exterior first. You can imagine the difficulty for the actors is they have no problem playing the beginning, walking up to the cabin.
But after they come out...
After they come out, Terry and Michael don't really know what happened in the interior of the cabin, because we were shooting it the next day. So I thought they did a great job of imagining how they would feel at the end, because Terry comes out scared out of his wits, and Michael comes out almost catatonic. But all of that was done before we played the interior, so it was interesting directing and trying to figure out what happened inside.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to say this, I think this description of how that scene came about, I think it's the kind of thing that will probably infuriate, some small fraction of fans of the show to hear, because they want everything to have been, very carefully orchestrated from on high from the very beginning, where, every frame of that scene was done specifically because Damon and Carlton knew that it was going to turn out, a certain way. And I know that's not how it works. I mean, I've talked to enough people on the show to understand that's not how it works. But it's so interesting to me to hear how... I mean, who said that to you? When you asked, is he there? And you were told, what do you think? Who asked that question? I'm so curious.
I'm sure it was Carlton, because I spoke mostly with him. But he didn't ask it in a way that suggested he had no idea. I think he wanted to see what I was feeling. I don't want to act like these guys were haphazard. They had strong feelings, and they conveyed their strong feelings. But one of the things I liked about directing that show is they wanted me to direct the show. So they wanted me to organically be in sync with them and not just, do their will. And so, in the end, it's certainly what they wanted, because the editing is so important. And, I shot a lot of footage for that scene, especially the inside of the cabin, with the jars and the fire and the chair, and almost all of it was composed editorially, except for Michael's part, which I thought was extraordinary, because he would literally, we were thinking of ratcheting him back as if Jacob had thrown him back, and he threw himself back.
Wow.
And I was, that's the value of people with real stage history in their acting, that he imagined being thrown back by Jacob, and I just shot it.
I'm stunned, because it really looks like there is a force that pushes him in that moment.
It's all him, but it's all him imagining what was on the page. Have you seen the script of that
No, I
show?
haven't.
Oh, I think it would be fine if I sent you the script.
I'd love to see it.
Because I show the script to my students, because I want them to see what the director works with. And I don't know, have you seen other episodes? The scripts
I think I've seen
episodes?
the pilot script of Lost, but that's probably it.
Well, I will say this, and I don't know who your audience is to say this, but the word fuck must appear 200 times.
Yes, I've heard that about Lost scripts.
And it's done in such a way that it gives you a very vivid sense of what they're looking for. It's not just for amusement, though it is funny. They create, the writers, and by that I mean the executive producers as well, create a feeling of power, and it really helps you when you're shooting the scene and trying to figure out, where to put the camera, where to move the camera, how to stage the actors. It's kind of on the page, but it's to be interpreted by the director.
So, I mean, you've talked a lot about, working with Michael and Emerson. I'm just, I guess I'm really curious. Two of the best actors, I think, on the show are the ones who, feature in this episode, Michael and Terry O'Quinn. Can you just talk a little bit about what it was like to be able to play them off of each other for this whole episode, and what it was like to see them and work with them together, and how you contributed to that?
They're both such good actors that you really have to go out of your way to screw them up. I mean, basically, you just, tell them your vision and let them go. And they had a great. And they both work. They're both very intuitive, and they both work so well off each other that that was the script was a very good script to have. But I felt my real good fortune was that it was those two guys as the leads, because they make your life easy. You know, they work hard, they're prepared, they have ideas, they communicate. I mean, everything you want in an actor is in both of them.
What was it like to film the scene at the end where you know, Ben shoots Locke and leaves him in the pit? I mean, just the process of translating that from script to you know, scene. What was that like?
Yeah, that in many ways that was easier because it was done more in pieces. I mean, I had a vision of the last shot of the episode that it would be the high angle crane, you know, pulling back to reveal Locke laying in the pit.
And the camera's kind of spinning a little bit as you pull up.
It's a crane. It's a techno crane with the head loose enough that the camera was spinning as it pulled up, and it just felt, especially with the music that was so great on Lost, which you kind of envision when you're shooting because you know the other episodes happening, and then when you're cutting, you have it to temp with, so you kind of get an idea that it's pretty straightforward in terms of Locke is surprised, and I haven't seen the episode in a while, but you know, Ben, I think it's a surprise when Ben shoots him, so that's all done in pieces, you know, and so it's easier than trying to do it all in one big, you know, orchestrated master. It's you know, and the guys are really good. I don't remember exactly how Terry threw himself backwards, but that was a stunt that somebody else actually.
Oh, falling into the pit, yeah.
But that was the only real physically challenging part of it. The rest of it was just the expressions on their faces, you know.
Yeah. Another, the other major plot point this episode that I think it's important for us to talk about is the murder of the entire Dharma initiative in the flashback.
And Ben killing his dad.
And Ben killing his dad, of course, which is a big part of that. I guess to start with the bigger thing. This is the worst thing I think that anyone does on Lost, or that probably anyone can do in any situation. It's essentially a genocide of this, entire, small civilization of people. I'm so interested in how you approached that as a director, this idea that Ben was going to do this, uber terrible thing, but I imagine you still probably want people to have some sympathy for him coming out of it. I'm just, what was your approach to that?
It's funny, I never thought about the sympathy part of it.
Okay.
For me, the much more difficult thing was him killing his dad.
Okay, interesting.
First of all, I was very close with my dad. And I was lucky because John Grise was an actor I knew, and I suggested him for the father.
Yeah, for Roger Linus.
Because not only was he a good actor, but because even though he was young enough to play the younger father, because of his balding head, he easily was able to play the older guy too. So I thought he was a good choice, and I liked the scene up on the mountain when he kills his dad was, for me a very intense experience with them, and then of course when Ben kills all of Dharmaville essentially, and Nestor comes out to greet him. Those were, they were big scenes, but they were pretty. You didn't have much play in them. They were written to be shot a certain way, and it was not like The Cabin where there was so much question. And then, Michael really never plays for to be liked. He just plays it with a conviction, and I think it's his conviction that makes him sympathetic because he feels it's the right thing to do. And the ending is set up by that scene which I thought was sort of poignant, where his dad, right before he kills his father, his dad says, let's go up on the mountain and drink some beers and maybe have some father-son time. And it's so awkward. And that was the one that got me, because the father is finally, after all this time, reaching out, and then it's too late. It's too late as far as Michael is concerned.
Right, because Michael made that decision a long time ago, and it sort of didn't matter what his dad did next.
Yeah, that was emotional. And then his response to Nestor, when Nestor says, should we get him, and he says, no, leave him there.
Yeah.
It's pretty cold, but it feels earned. It feels like he's a guy that's been hurt and is not showing it. And you've had that scene between the father and son where Ben tells him that you never were there for me, that you always blame me for my mother's death. And, it's a pretty sad, dysfunctional father-son relationship that ends badly.
Yeah, so I mean, I think what that leads to is I want to ask about also, working with, young Ben and the actor Sterling Beaumon, who plays Ben as a kid. To me, the most striking thing about watching him is his mannerisms and his sort of way of carrying himself just seems like so eerily similar to Michael Emerson.
Well, I think they actually worked together. I think Michael helped him.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the other interesting thing is the woman that played his mother is actually Michael Emerson's wife.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
So that the whole thing was very incestuous in a good way.
Yeah.
That they and then I think the glasses helped a lot. I think, but I cast Sterling, so he was the only kid. I mean, if he hadn't done it, I don't know who would have done it, because there wasn't really a second or third place. Sometimes you're casting a role, there's lots of possibilities. He was really the only person that I thought was going to convince you that it was Ben at a young age.
Well, what did you like about him and about working with him?
He had one very big scene with Nestor, actually.
Yeah.
And I thought that the way he played that scene, you could see how he became Ben, how he became the adult Michael Emerson character. And I think the part that seems the most Ben-like is sort of his way of reacting to things. It's not a terribly active character, except in that scene where he works with Nestor. So, for me, that's the mark of a good actor, the ability to listen to another actor, and the ability to react. And you can really tell how good people are, not but when they're talking, but when they're not talking. And now that I think about it, Sterling, I think that was the thing that I liked about him, was the way his physicality.
So, Bobby, last question. What are you working on now? Where can our listeners see your work today?
I have a new... I always went back... Television was always meant for me to make a living so I could do independent film. And I have a new independent film, a father-daughter story that I've been working on for the last year. It's called Pearl. And Nestor's in it. And so that's the new thing that's taken me a year.
And that'll be in theaters?
I don't know. This day and age, it's more likely to be Amazon or Netflix. Or we shot part of the movie in France, and so I was just earlier I had a call with France that we're going over there to screen it next month first. Try to sell it there first, and then I hope you'll see it.
I look forward to seeing it. Bobby, thanks very much for talking with us on The Hatch. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Oh boy, so of course this leaves us with the critical question of, is he there or isn't he there, in terms of...
He being Jacob.
He being Jacob and there being the cabin. Bobby tells us that he asked the showrunners that, and they said, well, what do you think? Which is such an incredibly classic Lost move. And then they shot it both ways. So it's like Schrodinger's cabin. Like, both things are true. Like, Jacob was there and he wasn't there. And it wasn't actually Jacob, right? It was somebody else. But, so we don't know. I don't know. What do you think?
Do I think he was there or not?
Yeah, do you think Jacob or some specter of Jacob was there?
So, I love the cabin scene. It's mysterious. It's exciting. It's surprising. It serves to screw around with both Ben and Locke's heads in a really interesting way. It gave us a lot to speculate on for years.
It feels like you're building to a butt.
I'm building to a very large butt. I'm sorry. Unfortunately, I don't think the cabin scene makes any sort of plot sense in retrospect.
Yeah.
Knowing what we know from later on. Like, we are led to believe later, we're told by, I think, Alana, someone else has been using the cabin, not Jacob. The implication being the man in black has been in there. Which, when we see the incarnation of Christian Shepherd in there in season 4, when he's in there with Claire, that's presumably the man in black who has taken Claire in at that point. And there's an implication that powder circle around the edge of the cabin is supposed to maybe be trapping the man in black in there, is the implication in season 6. Except that doesn't make a lot of sense because we've been seeing the monster running all over the island since day 1, so clearly he's not trapped in there.
Right.
So I don't know, when we look at what happened here, knowing that it doesn't really make sense for that to be the man in black,
right,
and knowing that it's clearly not actually Jacob, because Jacob is not an invisible dude who throws temper tantrums.
He's not like a poltergeist.
No, I hate to say it, I think the question of was he really there kind of doesn't even make sense to ask, because the producers just decided to set up this mystery, which is fine, and then they went in a different direction, which is also fine, because it was fun at the time. But
still is fun to watch, but
very.
Yeah, it doesn't super hold up in hindsight.
The Lostpedia page for the cabin is kind of a mess. I know in Lostpedia people really want to provide clarity to stuff. This is not a page that provides any clarity, because I think there's none to be had.
Oh dear.
Great
I don't
scene.
know. You're totally right in that the setup is so good, and the help me voice, and John disclosing that to Ben right at the very end, and it could have been fascinating. And Jacob doesn't really need that much help, it turns out. He does, but
not literal help to be freed from a cabin.
Right, or to be sustained in any way, or whatever.
We will get to season 4 eventually. In the meantime, we will be back next week with Greatest Hits, Charlie's sort of swan song episode before his sacrifice in the finale.
Yeah, that's going to be a lot. We will also have more from Nestor Carbonell, who of course plays Richard Alpert. We will be seeing more of him, throughout the rest of the series, really.
In the meantime, please rate and review us. Go on your podcast app, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, wherever you go, and let us know what you think of the show. We'd very much appreciate the feedback.
As said before, we are on Facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast, on Twitter @The Hatch Podcast, and if you would like to call us, we are at 9546 Dharma.
Our cover art is by Danny Roth. Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen.
See you next week.
Namaste.